Recently, I watched all 8 episodes of the TV adaptation of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which stars Donald Glover and Maya Erskine, so let's review. Now, before I get into it, let me lay a little groundwork. I have seen the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which came out almost 10 years ago and stars Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. And at the time when it came out, I did enjoy it, but it's just one of those movies that I've never really had any real motivation to go back and revisit. And while both of them have been in movies that I have liked or even loved, I've never really been the hugest fan of them both as actors and as people. Well, Brad Pitt, I can't say I don't like him as an actor. I don't really hear that much about him. And Angelina Jolie, this might be a hot take, but I think she's just a little bit overrated. And plus that whole love triangle between them two and Jennifer Aniston also didn't help my perception of that movie either at the time. But regardless, the movie itself, I haven't seen it in a long time, so I didn't get a chance to go back and revisit that before watching this show, so I just went into this show a little bit clean. And I'm also a huge fan of Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino, as a creative person. He's one of my favorite actors out right now. He's in one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and he's one of my favorite musicians. I own 3 of his albums on vinyl. That's how much I love him as a musician. And Maya Erskine, I'll admit, this is the first time I'm really hearing about her and the first time I'm seeing her in anything. But once I saw them two being cast as the titular Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I was like, that is interesting and intriguing. Let's see how this goes. Now, I love the show, but there are some things that do kind of stand out to me, or stuck out, I should say. Now, let me just say right off the bat, do not go into this show thinking that it's exactly like the movie, because it's really not. It's completely different. It's a new take. In fact, if anything, it's not like the movie until the very last episode, and I will explain in a little bit. But the reason this is nothing like the movie, because think of it like this. You got 2 people that get married, but they don't know that they're secret assassins. Until the middle of the movie, they find out and they fight each other, but then still fall in love with each other, and then the rest of the movie happens. But in this show, they already know they're secret assassins. They get paired up with each other and get unwillingly married to each other. And so throughout the entire show, they're just getting to know each other, getting more comfortable with each other, and getting to know themselves as people, and until the very end, where they eventually do start finding each other, and then that's where the movie really comes in. This adaptation has more so a focus on them as a couple, and it's really just a focus on relationships in general, because think about it, you get paired with someone, you do eventually fall in love with somebody. I just love how this show just goes through different phases of relationship. First, y'all getting to know each other. It's a little bit awkward at first, but then y'all get more comfortable around each other. Y'all start working with each other, but then eventually y'all start getting to know more about each other, either for better or worse. And especially in a work environment where y'all forced to work with each other, and then both parties' tendencies start to annoy one another, and they have to work with each other on these missions. But eventually these tendencies and the things that annoy one another, they eventually start to put both parties on edge, to the point where now they are fighting each other. In general, relationships are hard. Both of y'all have different life experiences, and they don't know how to deal with one another, but y'all eventually do learn how to deal with one another. And it all comes down to, are you attracted to each other enough? Are you invested in each other enough? Do you enjoy each other and love each other enough to be able to do the work and fight for each other? And that's what eventually comes down to. And I just felt this show excellently showed that. And like I said, it's really not like the movie until the very end. And I'll tell you, that last episode is my favorite, because now the 2 of them are fighting each other. They're really letting each other have it. But then eventually, once things calm down and they eventually start to understand each other a little bit more. But I'll tell you more about that last episode in a little. As much as I was digging this show, I did feel like the show did kind of drag a little bit. You did have your filler episodes. And because the show is an examination on relationships, the show did drag a little bit and feel a bit awkward at times, especially during the times where the 2 of them are fighting each other, they're arguing with each other, and it made it hard to binge all the episodes all the way through, which is why it took me so long to finally watch and review this show. But there are some episodes that I did enjoy, like the therapy episode, the one episode where they have to kidnap somebody, and the person that they kidnapped is acting like a baby, but that's because he's a bit drugged out right now, and so the 2 of them are essentially trying to get a feel of what it's like to take care of a child. But as for the 2 leads, Donald Glover, this is probably one of my favorite performances of his. I liked his performance because he's nothing like his character on Atlanta, which I will say this show does have the vibe of the show Atlanta, and especially since he brought in some of those people he worked on for that show onto here. But I like this character here because he's not as dry as Earn on Atlanta. Like, he's a little bit more open. He's smooth. I like this brother here. Like, this is probably the most charismatic I've ever seen Donald Glover in anything. like it's a relationship flip because Maya Erskine's Jane Smith, she's like the modern career woman. She has a tough exterior and she definitely has flaws. And these are all flaws that you would see in the male counterpart, but usually it's here, which I think helps for a modern twist. Really, both of these individuals are flawed beings, but Maya Erskine's Jane, she's probably the more flawed. And Donald Glover's John Smith, he's trying to get her to basically get her out of that. But both of them definitely have work to do, and I hope that there is a season 2 so that we can examine and explore these things. But the two of them, I felt they were awkward with each other at first, but that adds to the relationship aspect. But then as the show went on, I started to, be more invested in them. And the more time they spent around each other, that's when I started to be more invested into them. And it's definitely more believable because, like I said, the two of them, they're getting to know each other as a couple. But then as the show goes on and the more they learn about each other, the more they start getting on each other's nerves. And let's be real, the more you get paired with someone and the more time alone you spend with someone, the more the worst version of yourself comes out. The action in the show was surprisingly pretty good, especially since Donald Glover and Maya Erskine, they got to do some running. And I tell you, there are more than enough scenes where they are hauling ass. Like that first episode where the house blows up and they just start hauling ass. There's also some amazing guest appearances on the show too, such as Paul Dano, Isa Gonzalez, Alexander Skarsgård, John Turturro, Ron Perlman, Michaela Cole, Sarah Paulson, who plays their therapist on this show, Parker Posey, and forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Ragnar Mauro. He was on the show Narcos. But Parker Posey and other dude, they play another Mr. and Mrs. Smith, in which Donald Glover and Maya Erskine, they get to know them, and they play a part in the last episode. But going back to the last episode, I love how basically they're fighting each other. This is a part of the show that is like the movie, but then eventually Donald Glover, he gives both himself and her truth serum, and they're both of them, because of the truth serum, they're forced to basically let out what they're feeling towards one each other, and they basically warm up to each other and come back together, and that's really where the show is. Aside from points on the show where the show starts to drag a little bit, I really love this show. I dug this show, and again, do not go into the show thinking that it's like the movie, because it's really not. It does flip on the movie a little bit. If anything, watch this show, and once you get to that last episode, it will be worth it. I'm going to give Mr. and Mrs. Smith the hard eyes emoji.